Hey guys, ML Behrman here. Thanks for tuning in. It's the end of a long day, so I thought I'd do an episode of 3 questions. Tonight, ghosts, UFOs, and Bigfoot in Death Valley. I'm just going to get some water on for coffee. I'll be right back. Well, before we get started, I wanted to thank everybody who's contributed a story or a comment on my channel. I've gotten some really cool tales from people that have seen things that I've talked about. And there was something really neat. We did an episode on the Demon Flyer a little while back, and 2 people who didn't know each other reported that they saw the same thing on the same stretch of highway up in the desert 5 years apart. Didn't know each other, but they saw the same thing, which I thought was pretty cool. Now, I also got an email from a naturalist who said that he had been wondering if people might have been misidentifying a new type of super big desert hunting owl that he's been studying. Apparently, he thinks he's going to be the first to catalog it, which I think is real cool too. So anyway, again, thank you for sharing any comments or stories. Keep them coming because I read everything. I love true creepy stories, and I know everybody's got at least one. Okay, let's get started. All right, I'm going to read these because I don't have any phone service out here. First question is, are you going to have any ghost stories on your channel? Yes, I am. I've got 3 episodes coming, one on the road ghost phenomenon, one on a haunted mine that's kind of bloody, but pretty cool. And then one on orbs and spiritual manifestations at a remote spot in the Mojave. So yes, ghost stories are coming. What is the best place in the Mojave to see a UFO? Okay, well, obviously if I could answer that, I could also give you the lotto numbers. But I will say that watching the sky in the desert's an incredible experience because it's so open, it's so remote. There's so little light pollution that you can see things that you've never seen before. Satellites, space station goes by, all sorts of meteors all the time, which I find just fascinating. So I would encourage anyone to bring a chair, bring a blanket, bring a cooler, come out and sit out and see what you can see. Just remember, we're just miles from Area 51, Groom Lake, the Skunk Works, all the places they were testing stealth technology, and they're currently testing the new propulsion units and reconnaissance vehicles. So bear in mind, probably a lot of any strange things you're going to see are U.S. military. But who knows? You might get that one shot that proves it all. Okay, 3, where do you get your stories? Well, I get them 3 places. 1, general locations have folklore and stories associated with them. If you were in New Mexico, you know, someone says Roswell, well, you know what it's about. Out here, up in Johnson Valley, the Cement Monster, which was a story I did. The Needles Air Force, or the Needles UFO crash, well-known, documented. So there's those stories. Then there's stories that I've gotten when I come through the archives. And I love combing through old newspapers, I mean back to the 1800s. Because one of my pet theories is that a lot of phenomenon we see is interpreted through our culture or through where we are in time, meaning Native Americans might have encountered it and they thought it was something in a spiritual sense. The Old West, cowboys and Indians and you know, the railroads, they might have encountered stuff and seen it differently. And then our modern state, you know, with our technological wonders, you know, how do we relate what we see or experience to modern day stuff? And I love looking at old things because it shows a continuity of phenomenon, which is one of my main ideas in working in the desert, is to show that the area has a long, rich history of paranormal, supernatural, or just unrecognized phenomena. But the third way I get them, and which I really like, is just people tell me things or email me, or just out of the blue I get weird stories. And one example was about 15 years ago, I was trying to get into gold mining, or at least prospecting as a hobby. And I was horrible at it because I never paid attention in school to geology or anything like that. So I met a guy who was an old prospector, and we went out a few times, and this guy could spot anything. He'd show me, okay, well, look for this mineral, look for this rock, look for this formation. And we happened to be out, and he was also really good at tracking. And he'd go, oh, look, here, there's a bobcat came through here. He's probably 2 years old. And look, here's coyotes came through, and one was dragging its foot, so it's probably injured. Or, you know, so he was just really good at tracking. And so I asked him, well, how did you learn all that? Were you a hunter? And he goes, no, I was a Green Beret, and I served 3 tours in Vietnam, Special Forces. And I was like, oh, wow, I mean, Green Beret. And he goes, yeah, I used to be a man tracker. That's how I learned tracking. And I thought that was really cool. And we had stopped to back at the truck to eat lunch, and I had taken my boot off because I'd gotten a rock in it, and I made a print in the sand, a big footprint, and I went, oh, look, Bigfoot, as a joke. And he goes, no, Bigfoot's a lot bigger than that. And I was like, oh, really? And he goes, yeah, I've tracked Bigfoot. And I'm like, get out of here. He goes, no, I tracked him. And, you know, here I'm thinking this must have been the jungles of Vietnam, you know, somewhere way out there where something like that could live. And I'm like, okay, well, you got to tell me. And he goes, well, I encountered it up in Death Valley. And I'm like, oh, hold the phone. You encountered Bigfoot in Death Valley? Because at that time, I had no idea that people were seeing it up there. And he goes, oh, yeah. And I'm like, all right, you got to tell me the story. So I chronicled this in my book, but I'll tell you a short version now. He goes, yeah, I was up in Death Valley with a buddy at the end of the war, which was about 73, 74. And we had gotten out, and we were checking out old mines and stuff. And if you've ever been in Death Valley has millions of acres of remote stuff, and there's mines all over in the outback. And he and his buddy were checking out this one up in the Panamints, which is a mountain range up there. And they had been there for a couple days looking stuff over, and it was the night of the full moon. Now, if you've ever been in the desert, the full moon is so bright you could almost read a newspaper by it. And a lot of people, rock climbers, explorers, whatever, like to hike at night under a full moon because you can see so much and it's cool. It's not that scorching heat. So he and his buddy had finished dinner, and they decided to take a walk up the canyon a ways just to see, you know, what they could see and enjoy the night. It was their last night. So they were walking up this sandy wash, and he said they walked for about a half hour and got to the end of it, turned around, and they were coming back. And he goes, we had come back maybe 10 minutes, and I could see our tracks in the sand real clear. And he goes, all of a sudden I could see these big tracks that came out of the rocks next to us, stopped, turned, where you could see whatever it was turned to follow to see if, you know, where we were, and then trotted off this way, you know, to the other side of the canyon. And I'm like, well, what'd they look like? And he goes, giant human footprints. I mean, like 18 inches long, really wide, looked like a human print, but they were kind of flat-footed. And he goes, the weird thing was the toes. You know, human toes will go big, small, you know, small or diagonal. And he goes, these were kind of straight across almost. He goes, it was a real interesting foot. And he goes, I could tell it was super heavy because it pushed down about ½ inch in the soil, you know, deeper than our prints. And he goes, I could tell it was fresh. It must have been like 10, 15 minutes before we had turned around that this thing crossed. I was like, oh, wow, you know, what'd you do then? He goes, well, I told my friend, look, you walk back to camp, but keep talking like you're talking to me, like we're having a conversation. I'm going to go hide in these rocks, and I'm going to sit there quietly, and I'm going to see if this thing comes back out. I want to get a look at it. I'm like, really? He goes, oh, yeah, you know, I had my 45. I had just come back from my 3rd combat tour, so I was feeling pretty froggy, and I wanted to see this thing. So he said, I sat down behind this big boulder, and I was dead quiet, you know, didn't move, no noise, just eyes and ears, just like I was on ambush back in Cambodia. And he said he sat there for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, almost 40 minutes, didn't hear anything. And he goes, well, you know, I said, hell with it. I thing probably ran off. I'm not going to see it. So I stood up. And he goes, the second I stood up, something behind me stood up, about 10 feet behind me, stood up and ran off with made a loud grunt and ran off. And he goes, I wheeled around, and I didn't have a flashlight. He goes, I could hear it running, you know, displacing rocks and stuff up the canyon wall. He goes, so I ran out into the middle of the canyon because I knew it was going to have to cross the ridge. And when it did, it would silhouette itself in the moonlight, and I'd see what it was. He goes, I ran out in the middle, and he goes, I just turned to see this huge shadow go up over the side with one last rock tumbling down. And then he goes, I could hear bipedal footprints running off. And I was like, oh man, weren't you terrified? He goes, well, it happened so fast that I didn't have a chance to be terrified. But then when I thought about it, he goes, this thing, whatever it was trying to pull the same trick on me that I was trying to pull on it. It was waiting me out, and it was watching me. And he goes, then the hair on my neck stood up. And he said, I went back to camp really quick and got my buddy, told him about it. And we basically sat up all night talking about it and keeping the guns handy. And in the morning, they pulled out. So that was a story that I got just out of the blue. I mean, this guy that we were out looking at mineral formations and stuff told me this incredible story about Bigfoot in Death Valley. So that's the third way I get stories. I meet somebody and they've got a true creepy story, and I can convince them to tell me, or a lot of people just want to share it with someone that's not going to laugh at them. So that's how I get my stories. So anyway, that's 3 questions for tonight. I'm ML Behrman, this is Mojave Mysteries, and I will see you next time. Hey guys, ML Behrman here. I'd like to thank you for watching and also invite you to subscribe to this channel. And if you would, hit the like button. It really does help. Thanks.